are watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. From Toronto, Ontario, I'm Catherine Bullock. Assalamu alaikum and greetings of peace. Later on, we will talk to Dr. Mariam Pirbhai, who has written a new novel exploring anti-Muslim racism in Canada. But first, some news headlines. Canada's National Zakat Foundation forms Shariah board. Canadian Council of Muslim Women says systemic Islamophobia exists in Canada. Canada to add 500,000 immigrants in 2025. Former Pakistani Prime Minister wounded after gunman opened fire. Now the details. Canada's National Zakat Foundation has set up a Shariah advisory board to answer Zakat-related queries. The board will provide thoroughly researched information by reputable scholars based on the teachings of the Quran and Sunnah for complex and confusing questions. The board is run by 3 scholars. Sheikh Hassin Shabani is the senior scholar on the advisory board. He is currently an imam in Calgary, where he leads prayers and gives regular classes and counseling. Imam Nabil Khan and Mufti Taha Masood, both instructors at the Al Ihsan Center in British Columbia, are also advisors on the Shariah board. Nusrat Jaffrey, Executive Director of the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, says that systemic Islamophobia exists in Canadian provincial and federal governments. Jaffrey was speaking as part of a panel for news site rabble.ca on Islamophobia during Islamic History Month, along with Senator Salma Ataulajan, Monia Mazik, and Karl Nirenberg. Jaffrey says that Quebec is an example of state-sponsored discrimination against women who wear hijab. She says that the federal government's Employment Equity Act has not kept pace with changing demographics of Canadian society. Jaffrey argues, as a result, the experience of workers differs widely based on how they dress and look. Canada's Immigration Minister Sean Fraser has revealed Tuesday its new plan to bring in 500,000 immigrants each year by 2025. The immigrants would help fill gaps in the Skills and Labour Department. Refugees will also be arriving in Canada. Most of the new arrivals will be known as economic immigrants, who will fill nearly 1 million job vacancies in different sectors. That is on top of the 465,000 immigrants Canada expects to welcome next year, and up from the 400,000 that arrived last year. The Business Council of Canada says economic immigration is necessary to maintain a good standard of living for Canadians. Imran Khan, former Pakistani Prime Minister, is wounded slightly after a gunman opened fire at his protest rally today in northeast Pakistan, says a party official. The shooting killed one of his supporters, injured 9 others, a district police officer told a media source. The news comes after Khan and his supporters are en route to Islamabad, demanding early elections from the government. Pakistan's current prime minister and the military have condemned the attack. Khan accuses the current government and the military of conspiring with the United States that led to his removal from power last year. And that's it for the news. Very few novels in Canada explore the experiences of anti-Muslim racism from the inside. Dr. Mariam Pirbhai's new novel or debut novel called Isolated Incident has done just that. She is a professor of English and film at Wilfrid Laurier University in Ontario, and we are pleased to have her with us. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's our pleasure. I've had a chance to read some excerpts of your novel, and it starts with a very dramatic incident of vandalism at a mosque, and the volunteer he's gone down and he's cleaning up, and while he's cleaning up he starts thinking about his estranged dad, and he starts worrying about his mom, and then he's kind of like brought back to reality that he's sweeping, and then later on when he's waiting in the doctor's office with his mum in the appointment, he's eager to play a computer game, and he keeps getting drawn out of that excitement by someone who who wants to ask him questions about the vandalism. And it really struck me, this kind of weaving in, and like, oh, I really want to play a game, but I'm dealing with the anti-Muslim racism as like just one more thing in my life. And I wondered if you could talk to us about why you decided to write it like that instead of just a straight out the vandalism, he's sweeping the police, why did you kind of weave in these parts?
Mhm. Because I really wanted to show Islamophobia and acts of racism as they affect people in their everyday lives. So my central character, Kashif, who's a young second generation Canadian in his 20s of Pakistani background, he's just living his life. He's sort of reconnecting with his Muslim community, with his faith. He's just started volunteering at an Islamic cultural center in the GTA, sort of in the environs of Toronto. And then this attack happens against the mosque. And so, as he's simply sort of going about the business of his life, he's forced to question, how do I respond to something like this? What is my connection to this kind of attack? Is it an attack against me as well? And so those questions start to simmer and sort of take hold in his mind, and it starts to affect, as we get farther into the novel, it starts to affect all of his choices from here on out.
And do you think that's I think people who experience racism will get it. You're going to buy a coffee at Tim Hortons and suddenly someone says something to you and it's out of the blue and unexpected, and it can, rattle you for the rest of the week. And then you have to get on with other aspects of life. Do you think that's a really important thing to highlight? Do you think it's an underexplored point?
Yes, I mean, I wanted to sort of create a space in this novel where it's impossible to escape the kind of feelings of discrimination as they impact people both at the individual and collective level. So, in other words, even though the novel is titled very ironically, Isolated Incident, there's no such thing as an isolated incident. Sort of all of these acts multiply and accumulate in the mind of the individual. So they're simply going on with the business of their lives. And they become targeted directly or indirectly by these forms of discrimination. And so I wanted to sort of create a narrative where the reader, like the characters, like those who are targeted either directly or in terms of their communities by forms of discrimination, have no space to escape that feeling of discrimination. And so it really does operate at perhaps at that level of lived experience, that it's impossible to escape it because it's all around you. And so you're forced, there's a sort of necessity of awareness. In other words, you have to react in some way, even if you don't want to, even if you want to go about the business of your life.
Right. Even if you just want to play video games, it's always present. Tell us more then about the title. You called it Isolated Incident, and you've just said that you wanted to make that an ironic title. Can you just explain a little bit more?
Oh, absolutely. So I named it Isolated Incident because very often anti-Muslim hate crimes or any kind of hate crime, or indeed any form of oppression that's leveled against a minoritized or marginalized community is often labeled as an isolated incident. And in fact, it's very common sort of police terminology as well. I mean, whether you're talking about racism or even gendered violence. So whatever the forms of cultural or social violence may be, it's often deemed an isolated incident. What happens when we label things in this way is that we sort of render them to the footnotes and the margins. They are unremarkable. And if something is unremarkable and it's seen as a kind of one-off event, it doesn't warrant further examination, right? It doesn't warrant further inquiry or interest or examination as something deeper, as something that might go deeper, that might have sort of roots of root causes, rather.
Right. Wider
Of
society.
rise in colonial violence or gendered violence or whatever it may be in that case. And so the isolated incident is sort of a way of really turning our attention onto something else and not examining those root causes of violence, discrimination.
You introduce in the next chapter a young woman, and she's in a place making wudu, which is the preparations for prayer where you have the water running. And of course, those of us who've been on campus and struggled with having to put our feet in the sink and getting looks from the people, and this particular character is grateful that the university built a special only place where you can go and wash your feet, and all that we know what that means. But there will be a lot of non-Muslims reading who have no clue about what you're talking about. And I was wondering if you found that, or who are you writing for? And is that a really hard thing to do?
I mean, it is a difficult line to, to juggle and to balance. But really, I wanted this novel to be for all readers. One, I wanted to bring those kinds of practices of Islam into a thoroughly Canadian novel. Again, going back to the idea that, well, the main characters are these 3 second-generation Canadian Muslims who are university students, who are just doing regular things like working at a gas station and figuring out what they want to do with their lives. And yet Islam is another very important aspect of their life. And for some, those like my character Aruba, who is a practicing Muslim, it's an essential part of her life. And so I wanted to sort of illustrate that one is not mutually exclusive to the other, that Islam can coexist in other kinds of dimensions of a young woman's life. For instance, she can be a university student, she can be a feminist as well, and she's taking gender and women's studies. That's the university program that she's shown to be majoring in. And she can, be a daughter, etc., a best friend, and she is also a practicing Muslim. And so I wanted to normalize Islam in this way, in these cultural spaces.
Right. Sorry to cut you because we're almost out of time. Did you have to sort of take a break from the narrative every now and then and do a little bit of education for a non-Muslim reader, or did you just leave things for them to not understand or look up elsewhere?
That's a good question. I mean, very often when we're dealing with subject matter where we're not quite sure, sort of the level of insidership or awareness on the part of our readership, we do have to make these decisions. And I tried not to over-explain Islam. I tried not to provide glossaries when I use Urdu or other kind of terminology also. But I tried to sort of make it understandable in context. And I also have a character. So my young character named Kashif, he's also reconnecting with Islam. So it's not really a religion that's practiced in his household in a way that he hasn't necessarily been raised as a practicing Muslim. So he's also rediscovering Islam as a young man. He's rediscovering Islam. So
I'm going to have to cut you. We're actually out of time, but thank you very much for joining us. It was a very quick glimpse. We hope everyone goes and enjoys the novel. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for watching. If you like what we do, please share, like, and subscribe. Stay safe and God bless.